The morning mist clung to the marble steps of the Memorial Plaza, like ghostly fingers reluctant to release their hold on sacred ground. Sergeant Marcus Chen stood at attention beside the eternal flame, his ceremonial rifle perfectly positioned, his eyes scanning the approaching crowds with practiced vigilance. The plasma torch burned with an intensity that seemed to defy the dampness of Terra Prime's climate dome, casting dancing shadows across the names of humanity's fallen, etched into the obsidian walls. 3 years had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Confederation, and with it came visitors from across the known galaxy. The Memorial Plaza had become an unexpected pilgrimage site, drawing beings from dozens of species who came to witness what they called the human phenomenon, the inexplicable drive that had led one small species to sacrifice everything for principles that many advanced civilizations had long abandoned. Marcus had been selected for the honor guard not just for his military record, but for his understanding of why these names mattered. His grandfather's name was etched somewhere in the vast expanse of black stone, lost among the millions who had died in the resource wars that nearly destroyed Earth before first contact. Every day Marcus stood guard not just over a memorial, but over the memory of what humanity had endured to earn its place among the stars. The first tour group of the day approached, led by a tall Zephyrian guide whose translucent blue skin shifted colors with her emotions. Behind her walked a mixed group of beings, 4 armed Cathera merchants, crystalline resonance whose bodies chimed softly with each step, and several humans who had traveled from the outer colonies to see their homeworld's most sacred site. The Memorial Plaza, the guide explained in the Universal Translator's flat tone, represents the final period of human pre-contact warfare. The species engaged in numerous conflicts over diminishing resources, resulting in approximately 200 million casualties over a 50-year period. Xenobiologists consider this behavior aberrant, as most species develop conflict resolution protocols long before achieving spacefaring capability. Marcus remained motionless, but his jaw tightened slightly. The guide's clinical description reduced his grandfather's sacrifice to a statistical anomaly, a quirk of human development to be observed and catalogued like a museum exhibit. The Zephyrian continued her presentation, explaining the flame's symbolism and the monument's architecture, but missing entirely the weight of what it represented. An elderly human at the back of the group caught Marcus's attention. The man moved with the careful gait of someone whose body had been broken and partially rebuilt, leaning heavily on a walking stick. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, and Marcus could see the telltale scars of combat burns along his neck. Despite his obvious disabilities, the man wore his old military uniform, the fabric faded but immaculately maintained. As the tour group moved toward the central monument, Marcus noticed the elderly veteran struggling to keep pace. The man paused frequently, his breathing labored, but his eyes never left the memorial walls. When the group stopped before the eternal flame, the veteran attempted to approach the barrier that separated visitors from the monument itself. A security drone immediately descended, its sensors scanning the man with mechanical efficiency. "Unauthorized approach detected," it announced in multiple languages. "Please maintain the designated distance from the memorial." The veteran looked up at the drone with quiet dignity. "I just wanted to find my unit's memorial section," he said softly. "My squad leader's name should be here somewhere." "Lieutenant Sarah Chen." Marcus felt his breath catch. Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been his grandfather's commanding officer, the woman who had led the desperate defense of New Geneva during the final phase of the resource wars. She had died holding a bridge against impossible odds, buying time for civilian evacuations that saved over 1 million lives. The security drone's response was immediate and inflexible. "Memorial access requires advance authorization and medical clearance. Current visitor status, tourist. Access denied." The elderly veteran nodded slowly, his disappointment carefully controlled. "I understand," he said, though his voice carried the weight of a man who had already given everything and was now being told it wasn't enough. The tour guide, apparently eager to avoid any disruption to her schedule, began herding the group toward the next section of the plaza. The other visitors moved on, their attention already shifting to the next item on their itinerary. But the veteran remained, staring at the memorial walls that held the names of his fallen comrades, separated from them by a barrier that might as well have been a chasm. Marcus watched the scene unfold, feeling a familiar fire building in his chest. The same righteous anger that had driven his grandfather to volunteer for a hopeless defense, the same conviction that had led millions of humans to fight for principles that alien civilizations dismissed as primitive emotional responses. The veteran turned to leave, his shoulders sagging with defeat. He had come light years to pay his respects to friends who had died beside him, only to be turned away by bureaucratic protocols that reduced his sacrifice to insufficient paperwork. Marcus made his decision in that moment, just as his grandfather had made his decision on a bridge 70 years ago. Some things mattered more than regulations, more than protocols, more than the careful diplomacy that kept humanity's place in the Confederation secure. He stepped away from his post for the first time in 3 years of service. His ceremonial rifle still held at attention, and approached the elderly veteran. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "Lieutenant Chen was my grandfather's commanding officer. Would you like me to show you where her name is located?" The veteran's eyes widened, then filled with tears he had been holding back for decades. "You would do that?" Even though the drone said, "The drone," Marcus interrupted gently, "doesn't understand what this place really means. But I think you do." As Marcus led the veteran toward the memorial wall, neither man noticed the security cameras tracking their movement, or the automated alert being transmitted to the Confederation Security Force. They were focused only on honoring the memory of a woman who had embodied the best of what humanity could be, even in its darkest hour. Marcus guided the elderly veteran past the security barrier with practiced ease, his ceremonial rifle held in one hand, while he offered his other arm for support. The veteran, who had introduced himself as Corporal James Mitchell, moved slowly but with growing purpose as they approached the section of the memorial wall dedicated to the New Geneva defense. The obsidian surface reflected their faces as they walked, creating the illusion that the living and the dead moved together through the sacred space. Marcus had memorized every name in this section during his training, but seeing them through Corporal Mitchell's eyes gave the etched letters new meaning. "There," Mitchell whispered, pointing with a trembling finger at a name carved into the stone. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, 14th Engineering Corps." She was 23 years old. Marcus stood silently as the veteran reached out to trace the letters with his fingertips. The simple touch seemed to bridge 7 decades, connecting the old man to the young woman who had shaped his understanding of courage and sacrifice. "She saved us all," Mitchell continued, his voice barely audible. The HydroCorp forces had broken through our lines and civilian transports were still evacuating the residential sectors. Sarah ordered us to hold the Meridian Bridge while she rigged the support columns with demo charges, manual detonation only. The remote systems had been compromised. Marcus knew the official history, but hearing it from someone who had been there transformed the sterile facts into something alive and immediate. Mitchell's weathered face carried the weight of memory as he continued his story. "I was just a kid then, barely 18. When the order came to fall back, I froze. Too scared to move, too scared to abandon my position. Sarah could have left me there and completed her mission. But she didn't. She came back for me, got me moving, made sure I reached the evacuation point." Mitchell's hand was still pressed against his former commander's name. The bridge went down 2 minutes later, taking 3 HydroCorp assault battalions with it. Sarah was still on it when the charges detonated. The veteran's shoulders shook with suppressed emotion. "I've carried that guilt for 70 years. She died because she wouldn't leave a terrified boy behind. I never got to thank her. Never got to tell her that the life she saved wasn't wasted." Marcus felt the weight of his grandfather's stories in new context. Lieutenant Chen had been mentioned often in the family histories, always with deep respect and admiration. Now he understood why. "She knew," Marcus said quietly. "My grandfather told me that Lieutenant Chen always said the mission wasn't complete until everyone who could be saved was saved. You weren't a burden to her, Corporal. You were the reason she fought." Mitchell looked up at the young honor guard, seeing something of the lieutenant he had served under in Marcus's steady gaze. "Your grandfather was there?" "Sergeant David Chen, 14th Engineering Corps. He was part of the demolition team." Marcus pointed to another name on the wall, just 3 rows below Lieutenant Chen's. "He survived the bridge action, but died 2 weeks later during the final assault on the HydroCorp command center." The 2 men stood in shared silence, separated by generations but united by the same fundamental understanding of what service meant. Around them, The memorial plaza continued its daily rhythm, but this small section of obsidian wall had become a sacred space where the living communed with the dead. A soft, chiming sound broke the moment. Marcus looked up to see a security drone hovering nearby. Its sensors focused on their unauthorized position. Behind it, 3 Confederation Security Force officers approached in their distinctive blue uniforms, their expressions a mixture of confusion and official displeasure. Sergeant Chen, called the lead officer, a Zephyrian whose skin had shifted to an aggressive orange pattern. "You are in violation of Memorial. Plaza Security Protocol 7. Please step away from the unauthorized visitor and return to your assigned position." Marcus straightened to attention but did not move away from Corporal Mitchell. "Sir, this veteran served with Lieutenant Chen during the New Geneva defense. He has a right to pay his respects. Rights are determined by Confederation law and memorial access protocols," the Zephyrian officer replied curtly. "The individual lacks proper documentation and medical clearance. Your actions constitute a breach of security that endangers the memorial's integrity." Corporal Mitchell stepped forward, his voice steady despite his physical frailty. "Officer, I understand the regulations, but I traveled from Kepler Colony specifically to visit this memorial. I'm 91 years old, and this may be my last opportunity to honor my fallen comrades." The second officer, a tall Cathera with 4 arms crossed in a gesture of official disapproval, accessed a datapad with swift efficiency. Medical records indicate significant mobility limitations and potential security risks. Age-related cognitive decline possible. Memorial access protocols exist to protect both visitors and the memorial itself. Marcus felt his anger rising, but kept his voice level. "Corporal Mitchell poses no security risk. He's a decorated veteran who served with honor during humanity's most difficult period. These protocols weren't designed to exclude the very people this memorial honors. Protocols apply equally to all species and individuals," the Zephyrian officer stated firmly. "No exceptions based on emotional appeals or historical claims. Sergeant Chen, you will return to your post immediately, and the unauthorized visitor will be escorted from the memorial grounds." The third officer, a young human wearing the insignia of the Confederation Security Force, looked uncomfortable with the situation but remained silent. Marcus recognized the conflict in the man's eyes, duty to regulations versus understanding of what this moment meant. Corporal Mitchell began to step back, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "It's all right, Sergeant. I don't want to cause you trouble. Thank you for showing me Sarah's name. It means more than you know." But Marcus didn't move. The same instinct that had driven his grandfather to volunteer for impossible missions, the same conviction that had led Lieutenant Chen to risk everything for a terrified young soldier, now compelled him to stand his ground. "No," Marcus said quietly. "This is wrong." The Zephyrian officer's skin flashed to a deeper orange. "Sergeant Chen, you are now in direct violation of a lawful order. Return to your post or face immediate arrest." Marcus looked at Corporal Mitchell, seeing in the old man's face the reflection of every veteran who had ever been told their sacrifice wasn't worth remembering, every soldier who had been reduced to a statistic in some bureaucrat's report. He thought of his grandfather, of Lieutenant Chen, of the millions of names carved into the obsidian walls around them. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Marcus said, placing his hand protectively on the veteran's shoulder. The officers moved forward, their intentions clear. As they approached, Marcus noticed something that made his heart sink. Other visitors throughout the plaza had stopped to watch the confrontation, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The sacred dignity of the memorial was being transformed into a public spectacle, exactly what the protocols were designed to prevent. But as the security officers reached for their restraint devices, Marcus realized that some principles were worth any consequence. Standing beside a veteran who had given everything for those principles, surrounded by the names of those who had died defending them, he had never been more certain of anything in his life. The restraint cuffs materialized around Marcus's wrists with a soft hum of energy, their blue glow a stark contrast against his ceremonial uniform. The technology was designed to be humane. No physical discomfort, just an unbreakable barrier that prevented voluntary movement. But as the cuffs activated, Marcus felt the weight of something far heavier than electromagnetic bindings. "Sergeant Marcus Chen," the Zephyrian officer announced in the formal tone required by Confederation protocols, You are under arrest for violation of Memorial Plaza Security Protocol 7, insubordination to lawful authority, and endangering memorial integrity. You will be processed according to Confederation Security Code 3.7. Around the plaza, the morning's visitors had stopped their planned tours to witness the unprecedented sight of an honor guard being arrested at his own post. Whispered conversations rippled through the crowd in dozens of languages, their universal translators struggling to convey concepts that had no equivalent in many alien cultures. Corporal Mitchell stepped forward, his aged frame shaking with indignation. This is absurd. The boy was helping a veteran pay respects to fallen comrades. Where I come from, that's called honor, not a crime. The second officer, the Cathera with 4 arms, gestured dismissively. Emotional responses do not supersede established law. The individual's military history, regardless of its significance to human culture, does not grant exemption from security protocols. Marcus watched as the veteran's face transformed from shock to something deeper, a recognition that the principles he had fought to defend were being systematically dismantled by the very peace they had helped create. The old soldier's eyes carried the same expression Marcus had seen in historical footage from the post-war tribunals, when decorated veterans had been forced to defend their actions to bureaucrats who had never faced real hardship. "Officer," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite the restraints, "before you remove me from this post, I request that Corporal Mitchell be allowed to complete his visit. Whatever consequences I face are mine alone." The young human officer finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Sir, perhaps we could make an exception in this case. The gentleman is clearly no security threat, and his service record—" "Officer Petrov," the Zephyrian cut him off sharply, "you will not question established procedures based on species favoritism. The Confederation maintains order through consistent application of law, not emotional exceptions for particular groups." As the officers prepared to escort Marcus away, something unexpected happened. A small group of human visitors broke away from their tour group and approached the memorial wall where Mitchell still stood. They moved quietly, respectfully but with unmistakable purpose. "Excuse me," said a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes, addressing Corporal Mitchell directly. "Did you serve with Lieutenant Chen?" Mitchell nodded, his confusion evident. "Yes, ma'am. 14th Engineering Corps, New Geneva Defense." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Lieutenant Chen was my great-aunt. I never knew anyone who had served with her was still alive." More humans began to gather, drawn by some invisible thread of connection that transcended the official tour schedules and security protocols. A man in his 50s approached, followed by his teenage daughter. "My grandfather mentioned the New Geneva Defense in his journals," the man said softly. "He was in the 7th Medical Corps, treated wounded from the bridge action. He always said it was the bravest thing he ever witnessed." The Zephyrian officer's skin shifted to an agitated purple pattern. "This unauthorized gathering must disperse immediately. You are all in violation of Memorial Plaza crowd control regulations." But the humans continued to arrive, their movement organic and unstoppable. Word was spreading through the plaza with remarkable speed, carried by quantum communicators and whispered conversations. Visitors who had come as tourists were transforming into something more, witnesses to a moment that touched something fundamental about human nature. A elderly woman supported by a walking frame made her way slowly toward the group. "I was evacuated from New Geneva as a child," she said, her voice carrying across the growing crowd. "The transports got us out just before the bridge went down. We owe our lives to those soldiers." The Cathera officer activated his communication device, speaking in rapid bursts to what Marcus assumed was superior authority. The situation was clearly escalating beyond the simple security violation they had expected to process. Marcus found himself caught between pride and concern as he watched the scene unfold. The spontaneous gathering honored everything the memorial represented, but it also threatened to transform his personal act of conscience into a galactic incident. The last thing he wanted was for Corporal Mitchell to become the center of an interspecies diplomatic crisis. "Perhaps," Marcus suggested to the Zephyrian officer, "we could resolve this quietly. I'll accept full responsibility for the protocol violation if you allow these people to pay their respects peacefully." "The situation has moved beyond local resolution," the officer replied, his skin now a deep red that Marcus's cultural training identified as extreme agitation. "Confederation Command has been notified. Until higher authority determines appropriate response, all individuals involved will be detained for questioning. Officer Petrov looked increasingly uncomfortable as more security drones descended to monitor the growing crowd. Sir, detention of this many civilians could create significant diplomatic complications. Perhaps we should wait for specific instructions from command. Confederation law is clear, the Zephyrian responded. Unauthorized gatherings at protected sites must be dispersed using appropriate force if necessary. The words sent a chill through Marcus as he realized how quickly the situation was deteriorating. What had begun as a simple act of respect between two soldiers was becoming exactly the kind of incident that had historically strained human-alien relations. The irony was devastating. A memorial to human sacrifice was about to become the site of conflict between humans and the galactic community they had joined. Corporal Mitchell seemed to understand the implications as well. With quiet dignity, he began to step away from the memorial wall. "I think I should go," he said to the gathering crowd. "I don't want my visit to cause trouble for anyone." But the humans surrounding him had other ideas. They formed a protective circle around the elderly veteran, their faces reflecting a determination that had been passed down through generations of struggle and sacrifice. "No, one should have to apologize for honoring their fallen comrades," said the woman whose great-aunt had been Lieutenant Chen. "If paying respects to heroes is a crime, then we're all criminals here." Marcus watched this display of spontaneous solidarity with mixed emotions. The crowd's instinctive protection of Corporal Mitchell embodied everything noble about human nature, but it also guaranteed that the situation would escalate far beyond what any of them could control. In the distance, he could see additional security vehicles approaching the plaza, their blue lights reflecting off the obsidian memorial walls like cold stars. Whatever happened next would be remembered as either a triumph of human values or a catastrophic failure of the diplomatic restraint that kept humanity's place in the Confederation secure. As the restraint cuffs guided him toward the security transport, Marcus took one last look at the eternal flame, its plasma torch burning with the same intensity that had illuminated human courage for countless generations. Whatever consequences awaited him, he knew that some principles were worth preserving, even when the galaxy itself seemed determined to extinguish them. The holding cell in the Confederation security station was sterile and efficient, designed to contain beings from dozens of different species without causing unnecessary discomfort. Marcus sat on the basic sleeping platform, still wearing his ceremonial uniform, though they had removed his ceremonial rifle and the traditional honor cords that marked his status as an elite guard. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he could see Officer Petrov approaching with a data pad and an expression of barely concealed confusion. The young human officer had been assigned as liaison, presumably because someone in command thought species solidarity might encourage Marcus to cooperate with their investigation. "Sergeant Chen," Petrov began, settling into the chair outside the cell. "I have to ask, was this worth it? Your career is effectively over. 3 years of perfect service, commendations from 4 different species representatives, and you threw it all away for one old man?" Marcus looked up at the officer, noting the genuine puzzlement in his voice. "Officer Petrov, how long have you been with Confederation security?" 18 months, Petrov replied. "Transferred from Luna Base after the integration protocols were finalized. Then you wouldn't remember the ceremony when Earth joined the Confederation," Marcus said quietly. "The speeches about how humanity would enrich galactic civilization with our unique perspectives on honor, sacrifice, and loyalty. Do you know what Corporal Mitchell did during the Resource Wars?" Petrov consulted his datapad. According to records, he served in the 14th Engineering Corps, participated in several defensive actions, wounded twice, honorably discharged with full disability benefits. "Standard military service for that period." "Standard," Marcus repeated. "Officer, that man held the line while civilians evacuated from New Geneva. He watched his commanding officer sacrifice her life to save millions of people. He carried that memory for 70 years, and when he finally got the chance to honor her sacrifice, our protocols told him he wasn't worthy of approaching her memorial." Before Petrov could respond, his communication device activated with an urgent priority signal. Marcus watched the young officer's face change as he received whatever message was being transmitted. "Sir," Petrov said, suddenly much more formal. I need to inform you that the situation at Memorial Plaza has evolved. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean, evolved? The gathering of civilians around Corporal Mitchell has grown significantly. Current estimates suggest over 2,000 humans have converged on the memorial site, with more arriving continuously. They're calling it an honor vigil and demanding your immediate release. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. What he had intended as a quiet moment of respect between two soldiers had sparked exactly the kind of mass demonstration that Confederation authorities most feared from human populations. Are they being violent? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. No, sir. Completely peaceful so far. They're standing in formation around the memorial walls, sharing stories about family members whose names are carved there. But the sheer number of people is overwhelming our security protocols. Petrov paused, consulting his device again. And, sir, it's not just Earth. Reports are coming in from human colonies throughout the sector. Similar gatherings are forming at memorial sites on 17 different worlds. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. A simple act of conscience had somehow ignited a sector-wide response that threatened to strain human-alien relations across multiple star systems. There's more, Petrov continued hesitantly. The galactic news networks have picked up the story. The headline on the primary human channels is "Honor Guard Arrested for Helping Veteran Honor War Dead." Other species networks are reporting it as "Human Emotional Instability Threatens Memorial Security." The officer activated his datapad's display, showing Marcus the news feed scrolling across its surface. The images were striking. Thousands of humans standing in silent vigil around memorial sites, their faces reflecting the same quiet determination that had driven their ancestors through humanity's darkest periods. The Confederation Council has called an emergency session, Petrov added. Representatives from 12 species are demanding an explanation for what they're calling coordinated human insubordination. But 3 other species have filed formal complaints about the treatment of military veterans, citing their own cultural honor codes. Marcus realized that his decision at the memorial had inadvertently exposed a fundamental fault line in galactic civilization. The Confederation's emphasis on universal protocols and standardized procedures worked well for trade, technology exchange, and basic diplomacy, but it failed catastrophically when confronted with deeply held cultural values that didn't translate across species lines. Officer Petrov, Marcus said quietly, I need you to understand something. I didn't plan this. I didn't want this. But when I saw Corporal Mitchell being turned away from a memorial to people who died protecting everything we value, I couldn't just stand by and watch. But the protocols exist for good reasons, Petrov protested. Without standardized procedures, memorial sites would become chaotic, potentially dangerous. The regulations protect both the memorials and the visitors, do they? Marcus asked. Or do they protect us from having to confront the real meaning of what those memorials represent? It's easier to treat sacrifice as a historical curiosity than to acknowledge that some principles are worth dying for. Petrov's communication device activated again, this time with the distinctive tone that indicated a direct message from senior command. As he listened to the transmission, his expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. Sergeant Chen, he said slowly, General Morrison is requesting immediate transport to this facility. She wants to personally interview you regarding the memorial incident. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. General Patricia Morrison was the highest-ranking human officer in Confederation service, a legend who had commanded the integration protocols that brought humanity into the galactic community. Her involvement meant that the situation had escalated far beyond a simple security violation. Did she say why she wants to interview me personally? Marcus asked. No, sir, but... Petrov hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. I heard that she was part of the unit that recovered Lieutenant Chen's body from the Meridian Bridge ruins. She was just a lieutenant herself back then. The implications were staggering. If General Morrison had personal knowledge of the New Geneva defense, then Marcus's support of Corporal Mitchell wasn't just about protocol violation, it was about the fundamental question of how humanity honored its own history within the context of galactic civilization. Through the holding cell's small window, Marcus could see the spires of Terra Prime's government district rising into the artificial sky of the climate dome. Somewhere in those towers, representatives from dozens of species were debating the fate of human veterans, the meaning of sacrifice, and the price of maintaining order in a galaxy where different species held fundamentally different values. "Officer Petrov," Marcus said, turning away from the window, "when General Morrison arrives, please make sure Corporal Mitchell is treated with the respect he's earned. Whatever happens to me, he deserves better than being processed like a security violation." Petrov nodded slowly, his understanding of the situation finally beginning to match its actual complexity. "Sir, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. The protocols might be necessary, but they shouldn't make us forget why we're protecting these places in the first place." As Marcus prepared to face whatever consequences awaited him, he thought about the thousands of humans now standing vigil at memorial sites across the sector. They hadn't planned their demonstrations any more than he had planned his act of conscience, but something in the human spirit had responded to the idea that honor and sacrifice deserved more than bureaucratic efficiency. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to accept that some things transcended even the most carefully crafted protocols. General Patricia Morrison arrived at the Confederation Security Station with an escort that included representatives from 4 different species, their transport landing with the kind of precision that marked military rather than diplomatic operations. Marcus watched through his cell window as the general emerged from the shuttle, her uniform bearing the distinctive insignia of the Confederation Joint Command, the only military position that required unanimous approval from all member species. At 68 years old, General Morrison moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who had earned every star on her collar through decades of service that bridged humanity's isolation and its integration into galactic civilization. Her graying hair was pulled back in regulation style, but her eyes carried the depth of someone who had witnessed both humanity's darkest hours and its greatest triumphs. Officer Petrov appeared at Marcus's cell, his nervous energy palpable. "Sergeant Chen, the general has requested immediate access to you. I should warn you, she's not alone. The Confederation Security Director and the Human Cultural Liaison are with her, along with representatives from the Zephyrian and Kythera governments." Marcus stood at attention as the cell's security field deactivated, though he remained within the containment area. When General Morrison entered the holding area, her presence seemed to fill the sterile space with something indefinably human, an intensity that spoke of battles fought and principles defended against impossible odds. "Sergeant Chen," the general said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, "I understand you've created quite a situation." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, maintaining his formal posture despite the restraints that still bound his movement. "I take full responsibility for my actions. Do you?" General Morrison asked, stepping closer to examine Marcus with the same attention she might give to a complex tactical problem. "Because from what I understand, you helped an elderly veteran pay respects to fallen comrades. That hardly seems like something requiring responsibility." Behind the general, Marcus could see the Confederation Security Director, a tall Zephyrian whose skin was currently displaying the deep blue patterns that indicated official displeasure. The being stepped forward, its translator converting thoughts into universal language with mechanical precision. "General Morrison, the individual violated clearly established protocols designed to maintain order and security at protected sites. Personal motivations, regardless of their cultural significance to humans, cannot supersede Confederation law." General Morrison turned to face the security director, her expression unreadable. "Director Vashital, how many species maintain memorial sites within Confederation space?" "Currently 47 species maintain various forms of memorial installations," the director replied, clearly puzzled by the question's relevance. "And how many of those species fought wars where their survival depended on individual sacrifice rather than technological superiority?" The security director's skin shifted to a confused purple pattern. "General, I fail to understand the relevance of historical military tactics to current security protocols." "The relevance," General Morrison said quietly, "is that most species in the Confederation achieved spaceflight and eventual peace through technological advancement and rational resource management. Humanity is unique in that we nearly destroyed ourselves fighting over principles that other species resolved through logical negotiation." Marcus watched the exchange with growing understanding. The general wasn't just defending his actions. She was addressing the fundamental cultural divide that had created the crisis in the first place. The memorials humans build, the general continued, aren't just historical markers. They're sacred spaces that embody our species' relationship with concepts like honor, duty, and sacrifice. When you reduce Lieutenant Chen's sacrifice to a security protocol violation, you're not just dismissing one soldier's memory. You're declaring that human values have no place in galactic civilization. The human cultural liaison, a middle-aged diplomat named Dr. Sarah Reeves, stepped forward with obvious relief. General, that's exactly what I've been trying to explain to the Confederation Council. The memorial vigils aren't acts of rebellion. They're expressions of cultural identity that are protected under the Diversity Preservation Accords. But they're also unauthorized gatherings that threaten public order, interjected the Cathera representative, its forearms gesturing in patterns that Marcus's cultural training identified as bureaucratic frustration. The protocols exist to prevent exactly this kind of mass emotional response. General Morrison's expression hardened. Ambassador Kethvar, you're describing human emotions as if they were a disease to be contained. These people aren't threatening public order, they're demonstrating the very qualities that made humanity valuable enough for the Confederation to seek our membership. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a senior military officer directly challenging the philosophical foundations of Confederation policy in defense of human cultural values. The risk to General Morrison's career was enormous, but she was proceeding with the same calculated courage that had characterized humanity's greatest military leaders. Sergeant Chen, the general said, turning back to Marcus, tell me about Corporal Mitchell. What made you decide to help him? Ma'am, he was a veteran of the New Geneva Defense who had traveled from Kepler Colony to pay respects to his former commanding officer. The security protocols denied him access because he lacked proper documentation, despite his obvious disabilities and his genuine connection to the memorial. And you felt the protocols were wrong? Marcus hesitated, aware that his answer could determine not just his own fate but the broader question of how human values would be accommodated within Confederation space. Ma'am, I felt that some things are more important than protocols. Lieutenant Chen died defending the principles that those protocols claim to protect. Denying a veteran the right to honor her memory seemed like a betrayal of everything she stood for. General Morrison nodded slowly, then turned to address the group of officials. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored representatives, what we have here isn't a security crisis. It's a test of whether the Confederation can truly accommodate the diversity it claims to celebrate. General, Director Vachetal protested, accommodating diversity cannot mean abandoning established law. If every species demands exceptions based on cultural values, the entire legal framework becomes meaningless. You're absolutely right, General Morrison agreed, surprising everyone present. But you're also missing the point. Sergeant Chen didn't violate Confederation law. He upheld human law, which the Diversity Preservation Accords explicitly protect. The question isn't whether he broke your rules. The question is whether your rules are compatible with human membership in the Confederation. The implications of her statement sent a visible shock through the assembled officials. Marcus realized that General Morrison was essentially threatening human withdrawal from the Confederation unless accommodation was reached, a threat that carried enormous weight given humanity's strategic and economic importance to galactic civilization. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, recognizing an opportunity to build on the general's position. The memorial vigils we're seeing across human space aren't random emotional outbursts. They're coordinated expressions of cultural identity that demonstrate our people's deep connection to concepts that other species handle differently. If we can't find a way to honor that connection within Confederation law, then we're essentially asking humans to abandon fundamental aspects of their identity. Ambassador Kethavar's forearms moved in agitated patterns. You're suggesting that human emotional attachments should override rational legal frameworks. This precedent could destabilize the entire Confederation. No, General Morrison replied firmly. I'm suggesting that human emotional attachments are rational legal frameworks, at least for humans. The Confederation accepted us knowing who we were. If you want to keep us, you need to accept what that means. As the debate continued around him, Marcus began to understand that his simple act of conscience had become something much larger, a defining moment in humanity's relationship with galactic civilization, where the fundamental question wasn't whether humans could follow alien rules, but whether the galaxy was ready to accept that some rules needed to be different for different species. The Confederation Council chamber had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate an emergency session that would be remembered as one of the most significant diplomatic moments in galactic history. Representatives from 43 species sat in their specialized environmental modules, while holographic displays showed the continuing memorial vigils across human space, where millions of people now stood in silent testament to principles that transcended species boundaries. General Morrison stood at the central podium, her uniform representing not just human military service but the bridge between Earth's warrior culture and galactic civilization. Behind her, a massive display showed images from the Memorial Plaza, where Corporal Mitchell now sat in a place of honor beside Lieutenant Chen's name, surrounded by thousands of humans whose presence had transformed a security incident into a cultural awakening. "Honored representatives," General Morrison began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "3 days ago, one of our honor guards made a decision that has forced us all to confront a fundamental question. Can a truly diverse confederation exist when diversity is defined by conformity to universal standards?" The Zephyrian representative activated his speaking privilege, his skin displaying the formal purple patterns required for official address. "General Morrison, the Confederation has thrived for over 2 centuries precisely because our universal standards prevent the kind of cultural conflicts that destroy civilizations. What you call diversity, we call the path to chaos." "Representative Vashatal," General Morrison replied, "with respect, your species achieved peace through logical resource management and technological advancement. You never faced extinction because you refused to abandon principles that couldn't be quantified or programmed. Humanity is different because we survived by valuing things that your standards would classify as irrational." Dr. Reeves approached the podium carrying a data crystal that contained the results of the most comprehensive cultural analysis ever conducted on human memorial practices. Her research had been completed in 72 hours with assistance from xenocultural specialists across the galaxy, working around the clock to understand the deeper implications of what had begun as a simple act of respect. "The memorial vigils we're witnessing," Dr. Reeves explained, "represent something unprecedented in Confederation history. For the first time, an entire species is demonstrating unified cultural identity in response to perceived threat to their fundamental values. The peaceful nature of these demonstrations, despite their emotional intensity, actually proves that human emotional instability is far more controlled and principled than our critics suggest." Ambassador Keth Var rose from her multi-armed seating arrangement, her translator conveying the bureaucratic precision that characterized Kythera communication. "Dr. Reeves, cultural identity cannot supersede legal frameworks. If humans require different laws, then perhaps human integration into the Confederation was premature." The statement sent a ripple of shock through the chamber. Marcus, watching from the observation gallery where he had been brought to witness the proceedings, felt the weight of history shifting around a moment that could determine humanity's place in galactic civilization. General Morrison's response was immediate and uncompromising. "Ambassador Kethavar, humanity contributes 17% of the Confederation's military capacity, 23% of its emergency response capabilities, and 31% of its innovation in adaptive technologies. These contributions exist precisely because we approach problems differently than species who solve everything through rational analysis." She activated a holographic display showing human contributions to Confederation military actions over the past 3 years. The statistics were overwhelming. Human forces had been first responders in 67% of emergency situations, had developed breakthrough solutions to problems that had stymied other species for decades, and had consistently demonstrated the kind of adaptive creativity that came from culture shaped by struggle, rather than rational progress. "The question," General Morrison continued, "isn't whether humanity deserves accommodation within Confederation law. The question is whether the Confederation can afford to lose what humanity brings to galactic civilization." The resonant representative, whose crystalline form chimed softly with each word, offered a perspective that surprised everyone present. "General Morrison speaks to harmonies we have observed but not understood. Human military actions often succeed where logic predicts failure, suggesting operational frameworks beyond our analytical capabilities. Perhaps accommodation serves collective interests. Marcus realized he was witnessing the emergence of a coalition that transcended the simple human versus alien divide. Species that had never particularly understood humanity were beginning to recognize that human irrationality actually represented a different kind of rationality, one that produced results through means they couldn't quantify but couldn't ignore. The session continued for 8 hours, with representatives from each species addressing the fundamental question of whether diversity could coexist with universal standards. The debate revealed fault lines that had existed beneath the surface of Confederation unity for generations, brought into focus by one soldier's decision to help a veteran honor fallen comrades. Finally, the Confederation's senior judicial authority, an ancient being whose species had mediated galactic disputes for over a millennium, activated the Chamber's central communication system. The tribunal has reached preliminary conclusions, the being announced in harmonics that bypass translation systems entirely, speaking directly to the consciousness of every species present. Human memorial practices represent protected cultural expressions under Confederation diversity accords. However, implementation of cultural protections requires modification of existing protocols to prevent future conflicts. General Morrison felt a surge of cautious optimism. What modifications are the tribunal proposing? Cultural liaison officers will be assigned to all sites of significant cultural importance to member species. These officers will have authority to authorize access based on cultural rather than security criteria, provided no actual threat to site integrity exists. Additionally, memorial access protocols will be revised to recognize veteran status and cultural connection as valid authorization criteria. Ambassador Kethvar's forearms moved in patterns of bureaucratic dismay. These modifications create precedents that could undermine standardized law throughout Confederation space. Alternatively, the ancient mediator responded, these modifications recognize that standardized law serves member species rather than the reverse. The Confederation exists to enable diversity, not to eliminate it. Marcus watched as the chamber erupted in discussions that would continue for weeks, but the fundamental decision had been made. Humanity's right to honor its values within galactic civilization had been established, not through confrontation, but through the kind of principled stand that had defined human character throughout history. General Morrison approached the observation gallery where Marcus waited, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who had fought a necessary battle and achieved victory without destroying what she had sought to protect. Sergeant Chen, she said quietly, in approximately 1 hour, you will be released with full restoration of rank and privileges. Corporal Mitchell has been granted permanent memorial access status, and similar accommodations will be extended to veterans throughout human space. Marcus felt overwhelming relief, but also awareness that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had intended. Ma'am, I hope the cost of these accommodations won't damage humanity's relationship with our allies. Sergeant, General Morrison smiled, our allies just learned something important about what it means to be human. Some of them are disturbed by that knowledge, but others are intrigued. Either way, they understand us better now than they did 3 days ago. As they prepared to leave the council chamber, Marcus realized that his moment of conscience at the memorial had accomplished something unexpected. It had forced the galaxy to confront the reality that true diversity meant accepting fundamental differences in how species understood honor, sacrifice, and the principles worth defending against any odds. 6 months after the Memorial Plaza incident, Marcus stood once again at his post beside the eternal flame, but everything had changed. The morning tour groups now included a new type of guide, cultural liaison officers who understood that the names carved into obsidian walls represented more than historical data points. They spoke of sacrifice and honor with the reverence these concepts deserved, helping visitors from across the galaxy understand what had driven one small species to fight for principles that transcended rational calculation. Corporal Mitchell had become a regular presence at the memorial, arriving each Tuesday morning to spend time beside Lieutenant Chen's name. The old veteran had been granted accommodations that allowed him to access areas previously restricted to official personnel, and his stories had become an informal but essential part of the memorial experience for visitors who wanted to understand the human perspective on service and sacrifice. Marcus watched as Mitchell approached with his usual careful gait, now supported by a walking frame that had been specially designed by Kythera engineers who had been intrigued by human concepts of honoring disability rather than simply curing it. The collaboration between human veterans and alien technicians had produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. "Good morning, Sergeant," Mitchell said with the warm familiarity that had developed between the two men over months of shared vigils. "Beautiful day to remember the fallen." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, noting the small group of beings that followed in Mitchell's wake. The memorial had become an unexpected center of interspecies cultural exchange, as representatives from dozens of civilizations came to study human approaches to memory, honor, and collective identity. Among today's visitors was a delegation from the Resonant Collective, whose crystalline forms chimed softly as they approached the memorial walls. Their species had no concept of individual sacrifice, existing as a hive mind that made decisions through harmonic consensus, but they had become fascinated by human willingness to die for abstract principles that benefited others. "Corporal Mitchell," chimed the lead resonant, its translucent body shifting through colors that indicated respectful curiosity. "We seek understanding of how individual sacrifice enhances collective survival. Your species' approach defies logical analysis but produces consistent positive outcomes." Mitchell smiled, his weathered face carrying the patience of someone who had spent months explaining human nature to beings whose thought processes operated on fundamentally different principles. "Well, friend, it's like this. When you know that something is worth dying for, you also know what's worth living for. Lieutenant Chen died for us because we were worth saving, and that knowledge made us want to be worthy of her sacrifice." Marcus marveled at how the old veteran had become an unofficial ambassador for human values, his personal experiences serving as a bridge between Earth's warrior culture and galactic civilization's more analytical approaches to conflict resolution. The transformation had been mutual. Mitchell's interactions with alien species had given him perspectives on service and sacrifice that enriched his own understanding of what he had experienced. During the resource wars, the morning proceeded with its now familiar rhythm of tours, conversations, and quiet moments of reflection. Marcus noticed that the memorial had become more than a historical site. It had evolved into a living laboratory where different species explored questions of meaning, purpose, and the principles that made life worth preserving. Around midday, a familiar figure approached the memorial plaza. General Morrison arrived without fanfare, wearing simple civilian clothes rather than her formal uniform. She had made these informal visits a monthly tradition, checking on the implementation of the new cultural accommodation protocols and ensuring that the changes forced by Marcus's act of conscience were serving their intended purpose. "Sergeant Chen," the general said, approaching Marcus's position with the relaxed manner she adopted for personal rather than official visits. "How are the new protocols working out?" "Very well, ma'am," Marcus replied. "We've had over 300 veteran visitors since the Cultural Liaison Program was implemented, with no security incidents and numerous positive cultural exchanges. The memorial staff reports that visitor satisfaction has increased significantly across all species." General Morrison nodded, observing the mixed groups of humans and aliens sharing stories and perspectives throughout the plaza. "Any problems with the expanded access provisions?" "Only positive ones, ma'am. Yesterday, a group of Zephyrian historians spent 4 hours with Corporal Mitchell, documenting human military traditions for their cultural archives. They're planning to establish similar memorial practices for their own historical conflicts." The general's eyebrows rose with interest. "The Zephyrians are implementing human-style memorial practices?" "Modified versions, ma'am. They're creating spaces where individual Zephyrians can reflect on collective sacrifices made by their ancestors. It's not quite the same as our approach, but they've found value in the concept of honoring those who died for principles rather than just recording their deaths as historical events." General Morrison watched as Corporal Mitchell engaged with a group of young humans from the outer colonies, sharing stories about the new Geneva defense while pointing to various names on the memorial wall. The scene embodied everything the general had fought to preserve: the transmission of human values to future generations while maintaining the cultural exchange that enriched galactic civilization. "Sergeant," the general said quietly, Do you ever regret the decision you made that day? The investigation, the arrest, the diplomatic crisis. It all could have been avoided if you had simply followed protocols. Marcus considered the question seriously, watching as a Cathera engineer worked alongside a human veteran to design improved mobility assistance for disabled visitors. While nearby, a group of residents listened with fascination to stories about individual courage and sacrifice. "Ma'am, I think about Lieutenant Chen sometimes and what she would say about protocols versus principles. She died because she believed that some things were more important than following orders. If I had chosen protocols over helping Corporal Mitchell honor her memory, I think I would have dishonored everything she died for. And now, ma'am, I watch visitors from across the galaxy learning about human concepts of honor and sacrifice, while we learn from them about different approaches to service and community. Corporal Mitchell gets to honor his fallen comrades. Veterans throughout human space have access to memorials their friends died creating, and the Confederation has found ways to accommodate diversity without abandoning unity." General Morrison smiled, recognizing in Marcus's words the same conviction that had driven her own defense of human values before the Confederation Council. The memorial vigils finally ended last month. The last groups disbanded on Kepler Colony, where it all started. "I heard, ma'am. Corporal Mitchell received a message from the veterans there. They've established a permanent memorial garden dedicated to Lieutenant Chen and the other New Geneva defenders." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus watched the daily rhythm of remembrance and education continue around him. The Memorial Plaza had become more than anyone had originally envisioned, not just a place to honor the dead, but a living space where the values they had died for continued to evolve and inspire new forms of understanding. The eternal flame burned with its usual intensity, but now it illuminated something beyond historical memory. It had become a beacon that attracted beings from across the galaxy, who sought to understand what made humans willing to sacrifice everything for abstract principles. And in that understanding, they found ways to apply similar dedication to their own values and communities. Marcus realized that his moment of conscience had accomplished something he never could have planned. It had demonstrated that human values weren't obstacles to galactic civilization, but contributions that enriched the entire Confederation's understanding of what it meant to live for something greater than individual survival. As the day ended and the last visitors departed, Marcus remained at his post beside the eternal flame, guardian of a memorial that had become a bridge between humanity's warrior past and its collaborative future. The names carved in obsidian continued to tell their stories, but now those stories reached across species lines to inspire new forms of courage, sacrifice, and honor throughout the galaxy. The protocols had been changed, but more importantly, hearts and minds had been opened to possibilities that no regulation could have mandated. In helping one elderly veteran honor fallen comrades, Marcus had helped the galaxy discover what humanity had always known, that some principles were worth any sacrifice, and that honoring those principles made everyone who witnessed it a little more worthy of the peace they defended.